Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. We'll be getting started in just a moment. So take a moment, find your seat, and we'll be right back with you. All right. Welcome, everybody. Can y'all hear me okay? Excellent. Welcome. My name is Marianne, and I'm the store manager here at City Bookshop, an independent, community-minded, and woman-owned bookstore. Woo. Thank you all so much for being here. Is this anybody's first time here?
Yes.
Lots of people. Amazing. Thank you so much for coming out to celebrate C.K. Chau's novel, Good Fortune, a whip-smart and charming debut novel that brilliantly reimagines Pride and Prejudice, set in contemporary Chinatown, exploring contemporary issues of class divides, family ties, cultural identity, and the pleasures and frustrations that come with falling in love. If you enjoy tonight's event, you may also enjoy one of our many upcoming events throughout August, including our Sunday evening event with Naomi Hirahara to discuss Evergreen, a post-World War II Japantown mystery. You can check our website for more details on that, Romance Bookstore Day, and all sorts of other things we have coming up. Before we get started and I introduce our authors, some very quick housekeeping notes. Please take a moment if you're here in person to silence your cell phones. If you need a restroom this evening, they are located upstairs past the cash register. More importantly, if you need a copy of tonight's book, you can purchase those right at the register upstairs as well. And we will have a Q&A following the discussion. So if you have a question, you can raise your hand here in person, or if you are joining us on Zoom, you can submit a question anytime using the Q&A feature on Zoom. Now, I would like to introduce tonight's conversation partner, Kate Myers. Kate Myers' writing has appeared in Elle, BuzzFeed, Narratively, Pop Sugar, and Self Magazine. She studied archaeology at the University of Pennsylvania and has lived in New York and Los Angeles, where she worked in TV development and for College Humor. She now resides in Annapolis, Maryland, with her husband and daughter. And our featured author of the evening is C.K. Chau. C.K. Chau is a Chinese-American writer based out of New York. Her writing has appeared in Bright Wall, Dark Room, among others, under another name. A graduate of Hunter College, she currently works in publishing in New York City. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to everybody.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. This is so exciting. I was just here 2 weeks ago for my own book, so this is like such a joy to be back. I love this place, and I'm so excited to be here with CK. I'm Kate. And yeah, we were just back there backstage chatting about so much stuff and saying that we could chat for hours. So
Yeah, we definitely could.
yeah, I have so many questions that I was like, I'll save it for when we're out there. So lots to get through. We are at the we were connected by HarperCollins because we're at the same imprint at the publisher. So we have lots to talk about, lots of notes to compare.
Part of the same family.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. The same team. We can like talk trash about everyone. No.
But we
No,
won't
love
because
them.
we're so gracious and they're incredible.
They honestly are the best. We're both feeling very lucky, actually. But yeah, I want to know about every writer and especially about you because we ended up at the same place. What was your journey to publishing? You know, like, or I guess your professional journey that culminated in you writing the book and this happening, and like really the nitty gritty.
I feel like my journey to publishing was a little bit like the Oregon Trail. Like you sort of just set out without an idea, just a vague sense of where you want to end up. And you kind of die halfway along the way. It was a lot of trial and error, a lot of learning how to write what I was trying to write. And then a lot of throwing noodles at various people looking for representation and making sure that, the right people who really believed in the book and in the way I told stories wanted to put it out there in the world. And I did. I found someone fantastic. And then I found Harper, where we both landed, and they've been very supportive the entire time. It's not the most beautiful or glamorous process to getting a story out there, but all that matters is the cover on the book at the end of the day, and that you can see it in the world.
It is crazy to see the cover, and it's a beautiful cover. This is an awesome cover. Are you happy with it? Do you love it?
I'm very happy with it. It kind of took shape over a lot of different conversations. And when we were thinking about how we wanted the book to represent itself in the world, I was like, it has to emphasize that it's really about New York City. And it's really about this, about LB, who's our heroine, and really putting herself out there and to give it a sense of her personality. So, she's got a little traditional dress on, but she's also got some Doc Martens and a little leather jacket. She's not very staid, and you get a sense of who she is just by looking at her. I believe very strongly in judging books by their covers.
I mean, that's what everyone else does. So it's very fair.
She picked things up because they look beautiful.
Yes.
There's nothing wrong with that.
It's so true. And this also, when I had my cover done, something I didn't realize was so true. It has to look good on the shelf, and it has to look good when it's this big on Instagram.
Yes.
So both are true. And this
or
holds
even
up.
just the spine. You want something to draw the eye in, so someone pulls it off the shelf.
Right.
Yeah.
And it does that. And I think you're right. It conveys so much. It really draws you in. It tells you about the main character and about the setting. Yeah, love the cover. They do a great job over there. So when you landed at Harper, what I feel like writing, we were just talking about this, you're such a lonely weirdo when you're writing. You're by yourself, you've got no one else to talk to. So what was it like when you started working with an editor and it became a more collaborative process?
It's always very fun to be asked questions about things and to be like, yes, I've definitely considered this thing that you're asking me about, and I definitely have an answer for you. Please give me 10 business days. There were times when, she would point out things that I had missed when I was writing it. You're so in your own head throughout the process that sometimes you forget that you use the same word 17 times, or that people magically transport to different parts of the room when you aren't looking, But a great editor really helps you find those spots in the book that are kind of weaker, that don't support what you're trying to do, to make the book as strong as it can be and the best that it can be. And I really believe in being edited very strongly. And so part of that collaborative process was really just tell me everything that you want to talk about. Let's sit down and hash it out. And if I don't have an answer, then we can talk through it and figure out, what's the best way forward. And I really enjoyed that.
So were there any times when you disagreed or pushed back?
It's all a blur. The process, part of it was that the time period for this book felt short to me. Like we were trying to get it out, by the time that it came out. And so I'm sure there were points where we disagreed, I think. But I think they understood what the book was trying to do. And so a lot of the time, anything that they said, I was like, that's fair, or you're right. And I could kind of pick up the thread and move on with it.
That's great. That's so good. Yeah, that can be tough, but I know as first time authors, you're not sure like how that relationship is supposed to unfold. And speaking of relationships, I mean, the book we all know is a retelling of a classic. It's so cool. I should go without saying, I love the book. The book is so fantastic. And it was such a joy to read, so much fun. And I feel like any book that comes out in the summer is branded a summer read, but this is like evergreen to me any time of year.
Perfect beach
Also a great
bag.
beach
Yeah.
read. The road in your beach bag, gals.
Yes, exactly.
All the press. But the relationships in the book, would love for you to talk about that. Obviously the romantic relationships are top of mind, but the mother-daughter relationship and the siblings. So how did you approach those?
I am a very big Jane Austen fan, and I have read a fair number of retellings myself. And I think what I wanted to bring out in this book was really that there are more relationships to it than just the romance. I love the romance, and it has a key pivotal role to play, but it all is layered and built together. You need all of those elements to make that book what it is. And part of it is that she grows and becomes who she is because of her relationships with her mother and her father and her siblings. For those who have siblings, your relationships with your siblings are not necessarily always sunshine and rainbows. There's really interesting tension there that can be really funny. You torment each other, but also you love each other. And that torment comes from that place of love. And I wanted to emphasize that, there's 5 of them, and that creates a lot of opportunity for bumping up against each other and for figuring out how you are who you are versus who other people believe your sisters to be, or who you're interpreted as one of a big family.
And I loved the mother-daughter relationship
Yes.
too. I loved that.
I deeply believe that, the relationship between Mrs. Bennet and Elizabeth, or Mrs. Chen and LB in this book, is very much one of frustration and a little irritation. She's supposed to feel annoying, but you know that it comes from a loving place. That is the mother-daughter
Like all
relationship.
moms, yes.
Yeah.
I have a mom. I now am a mom. I get it. It's all frustration.
Yes, it goes both ways.
That's right. Oh,
Yeah.
definitely.
Sometimes you're a little tired of your kids,
Oh, 100%. That's why I'm here. No, she's 2. So we're just starting out. But I also, in the adaptation of it all, not even adaptation, but in the reinterpretation of the Pride and Prejudice of it all, I'm so curious about your approach to, it's such a strong, cool, as you talked about with the cover, sense of place. And so how did you reimagine the story in that setting, and how did you invoke that?
That's a great question. Thank you. I really was thinking about how to translate the core themes of the book and the themes of the book that resonated with me in a way that felt appropriate to my sense of time and place, and in a way that felt true for modern audiences. And I feel like the early 2000s was such a strong time period in terms of thinking about the ways that community was changing, how we were thinking about community with the rise of the internet, and also, new development taking place. And New York in the late 90s and early 2000s is a place that I spent a lot of time in as, a child. And it had such a strong place in my memory. And when I was thinking about how to bring all of these themes together, it seemed like the natural place to do that, because it's the perfect site for these conversations about community, what it means to lose a community, what it means to build a community, what that stands for you in the wake of possibly losing it. And the time period was just, it's close enough that there can be funny remembrances about it. Lots of little brand things that we forget now that we're, 20 years past it. But it also feels very rooted in, a sense of progress. If that makes sense.
Totally. And I think the story obviously is so timeless, and that's why there are all these incredible reimaginings of it, and especially this one. I feel like one of the reasons people love the original is that it was sort of candid in its discussion of class and money, sort of overt. And so how did you bring that into the fold too, in the 4 of this one, talking about class and money in the modern era?
Yeah, I think Jane is incredibly smart about class, social class, and also about the concerns of wealth and money and work. It's kind of the underside of all of that. There's a point early on in Pride and Prejudice when she talks about, there's like a little aside about how Mr. Bingley makes his money by trade. And I thought work is kind of the defining atmosphere and issue for our time. It's what consumes our life. And I think in thinking about how to modernize this book, all of the pieces were there in the original. And I wanted to say, we think of these things as being outdated, or, they belong to a time that isn't ours. But social issues and the issue of class and fitting into your class or representing your class are still relevant to us, even now,
Especially around marriage.
Yes, or even just moving outside of your station and what that means. How are you supposed to represent where you came from? And are you doing a good job? And what if you think you're doing a good job and somebody else disagrees? I think there's all of these ways that we shuffle things around to invisibilize class, especially these days. But I think it's just as present. And I wanted to shine a light on that and to make it funny. I think first and foremost, everything in a Jane Austen retelling should be funny.
Yes. And this book is very funny. Yeah, I think that's true. It's a send up, to examine something is almost to take the wind out of it like that. And that, this is an incredible example of that.
Yeah, thank you.
And there's so many serious explorations of these things we're talking about. And so it's fun to send it up and make it fun, which indeed you're doing an honor to her.
Yeah. And I think also, people sometimes get lost in telling these big stories about class. Being working class or being, in the lower classes, whatever, there are aspects of it that are obviously not pretty, not fun. But nobody's life is like purely tragedy. You know what I mean? There are moments when you find joy in your life, in the work that you do. And part of that joy is ridiculous. My characters, they work in a Chinese restaurant. And a lot of it is just like hot grease in the air and you don't want to be there. And it's a little miserable, but also it's like, somebody accidentally put the things in the fryer in the wrong place, or people are walking in at the wrong time. There's an aspect of farce to it too. And I wanted to draw that out, just because it's about class or about serious issues, it doesn't mean that, we're all walking around with frowns on our faces all the time.
Totally. And it makes it relatable. It helps you see it, when you can lighten up a little bit like that. And you incorporate a fair amount of Cantonese in the book too. And so how was the process about weaving the language in and out, and why and how? And would love to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, voice is super important to me. I think voice is super key to the original as well. Thinking just about the omniscient narrator in the original book, she's so sharp and she's so witty and she's so funny, and she understands very clearly where she's coming from in that very stratified society. And when I was thinking about transporting this, there was a very sharp Cantonese inflected voice in my head. And I thought about all of the ways that that segment of society features the same level of class awareness and surveillance, for lack of a better word. I wanted to tell an Asian American story, and very specifically with that hyphen in there. And part of that was about representing that our stories and our lives are not monolingual. They take place in these kind of tapestries of different languages that are not just all Chinese either. And I didn't want to italicize and turn it into this teachable moment of like, here is your word for the day. And this is what it really means. I wanted it to represent the experience faithfully, which is to say they're always talking in a pidgin, but we're going to translate this for you because we know that you're not coming here with, all of the right vocabulary. And also to keep the tonal music of it. I think it's a very beautiful language. And I wanted to highlight it because I think it's often touched on as a character note or a detail, but it really is, it offers so much context and depth to what happens and to the people who use it. And it's a musical language, and I wanted to spotlight it.
I love that. And to that end, if this isn't too personal, I'm so curious what your sort of like what you brought to the characters and what you brought to the book personally, and sort of where you see yourself in the characters.
That's a great question. It's very risky. I feel like everyone's always very interested in the writer's relationship to autobiography, and the answer is I have spent so much time with the original text that I was really thinking about it character first. But when I was thinking about those characters, how do they fit into this neighborhood? What do they look like? For Mrs. Chen, what is the best way to represent that striving? She's obviously a realtor. She's obviously a realtor who's operating without a license, and she is pushing herself into these conversations where other people might be like, do you really, are you supposed to be here? And she can be like, yeah, I'm totally fine. Here's my card. Here's my details, everything. And it really was defined by the place first and letting that speak through the characters and moving from there. In terms of what I brought to it from my own personal biography, I think you pick up a lot of details and voices when you're a kid in these spaces. There's a lot of it that colors how I built the world.
I love that. And I have two more questions. I don't know how we're doing on time, but two more things that I really want to get into. One obvious question to me is, what are some of your favorite, I want to hear both book and screen, reimaginings, reinterpretations of Austen's work?
That's a dangerous question.
So many to choose from.
So many to choose from. And I am a fan of all of them. But I will say that my personal favorites are the ones that emphasize the humor a lot of times, the personality that I feel like is in Jane's narrator. So I love Bridget Jones' Diary, the book and the movie. They are different, but they bring similar energy to the table. I am a very big fan of the 1940 adaptation of the book. It's not very faithful. It's very old, but it goes in with kind of like a wink and a smile. Like the whole time, it's kind of just joking with you and pulling your leg. And that's the way that I think this book should feel. In terms of other written interpretations, I have loved, Sonali Dev's take on it. I think there's ways that people approach it from a cultural perspective that adds depth to it. But it brings something different,
and lets people see themselves in this story.
Yes, it's enriching in a different way.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I love it. And yeah, this setting is just, it seems perfect for it, honestly. Yeah. Okay, I lied. Now I have two more questions. My next one, and I'm sure many people here are wondering this, is what are you thinking about working on next?
Well, I have a lot of different ideas kicking around, and I'm currently trying to wrangle them into something that might be a cohesive story. I will say I've been interested in social media as a concept for a while, especially how it influences how we think about ourselves and other people in our orbit. And if I'm ever able to put pen to paper again, my hope is that that's what my next book will kind of hover around.
Yeah. I was wondering if you would do another interpretation of a different Austen work, if you would think about doing that.
I never say never, things are always possible. I think there's so much scope and depth in her works that you can definitely transform them. I will say my personal favorite Austen books are Pride and Prejudice, of course, and Persuasion is up there. And, I don't want to make every Austen adaptation about real estate, but I do think that it's a useful lens for exploring a lot of how she approaches things.
Yeah. Property.
Exactly.
Yeah. And lastly, we were talking about this back there, but I'd love for you to talk about what book tour has been like, and especially your New York story. That is a crazy story to me.
My New York story?
About the Chinatown store.
Oh, yes. Book tour has been full of surprises, both wonderful and, challenging. So I decidedly chose a bookstore to launch that was, a female-owned bookstore in the heart of New York City, Chinatown. It's called You and Me Books. And a few days before we were supposed to proceed with launch, they unfortunately suffered a fire. They've had a GoFundMe that they're raising funds to make sure that they can keep their staff on and rebuild. And that was one of those unforeseen things that happens during the launch of a book that you aren't quite prepared for. But they have met their fundraising goal. I'm sure they're still, yes. It was very important to me to support an independent bookstore because so much of this book is about supporting community and the local mom and pop shops that like, and you love and you frequent. And so I wanted to start there, and it didn't end up working out that way. We ended up going to Housing Works, which is a New York organization that's focused on, supporting the homeless, and they do fundraising and things like that. They're do thrift shops and things. And it was a fantastic space to work and like launch from. But yeah, you sort of just have to roll with the punches in a lot of ways throughout the process. And sometimes that's a fun role, and sometimes it's a little bit like, you're trying to figure out which way is up. Yeah, exactly. But the launch has been an incredible experience. You only get to launch a first book once. So I have really wanted to enjoy and savor every aspect of this process, whatever happens, even everything that happened with you and me. So it's part of this book's journey.
That's exactly right. It really is. That's incredible. Well, I could talk to you forever about this whole process because we're in the same boat. So all this hits home. I love it. But I'll take any questions if anyone has any, or if there are any from the virtual, my side to the camera, anyone digitally, any questions? Yes.
Spent a lot of time with the characters in Pride and Prejudice. So what is your verdict on Mary Bennett?
Well, what do you
Let me
mean?
repeat the question really, or sorry, yeah, go ahead.
As I read the book, I dislike her, particularly because I think she reminds me of myself, as if like, I more control with books than people. But I'm just so curious, if someone who's read it so closely, she can be like one of those fairly polarizing, irritating, but making others irritating as could be characters. And trust me, this is the least nerdy question.
Oh, we're gonna come back to you. So for those at home, the question is, as someone who read the Austen text very closely and spent a great deal of time with it, how do you feel about Mary Bennett? Is she a likable character? How do you feel about the characters after spending all this time with them?
So I'm gonna squirrel on that a little bit. I think, great characters are great characters, and I think they serve a function in the plot of the novel, and they are independent of themselves. Likability is not necessarily my way of approaching character. With that said, I think all of the sisters in the book can really be read in two ways. That's kind of their charm and the point, we see them so narrowly through how Elizabeth sees them. And she thinks that her way of viewing the world is the right way. So in her eyes, obviously her middle sister is, she's a little bit of a brat. She's a little bit of a show off, but like, that's the older sister view. And that's how she sees it. But I don't think we have to take that as the truth. That's just her point of view. And when I was adapting Mary for the book, I think it's important that you feel how embarrassing Elizabeth feels like her family is. They don't necessarily have to be that embarrassing in real life, but she feels that as humiliating in the way that you do when you're 17 and somebody starts singing at your birthday party, and part of that is her journey to see them as more real people, more fleshed out people. So I am Mary agnostic in the way that I'm agnostic. I think on many of the sisters, I think you can, if you're inclined to think that she's, a little bratty, you can. If you are inclined to think that she is an understated heroine, you can. There's a way to read her in both ways. Am I going to say that's determined by your own personal birth order? Maybe not. But if you have any siblings, I think a lot of times you're inclined towards one direction or the other. But thank you. That was a great question.
Yes, go ahead.
So, we talk all the time about how representation is important, and also about all the adaptation of the different versions of Pride and Prejudice. So, if the writer's strike and the actor's strike get resolved, do you have a dream casting?
Ooh, so good. Who is the dream cast for the book?
Yes, we are very pro union. We are, it's true. Go labor. So in terms of who my dream cast would be for my own adaptation, I'm a big believer in casting unknowns. I think there's a lot to be said for finding the magic that somebody new brings. But I will say I do have a dream LB in mind, and that is probably Stephanie Sue. I think she walks such a fine line between comedy and seriousness, and she can bring a little bit of the farce and the craziness, while also making you feel very deeply about her. So she's a dream cast for sure.
She would be amazing.
Yeah. Manifesting it right now.
Put it out there. Anyone else? Any questions from home? Oh yeah.
Curious about, you could say more about why real estate interested you for adaptation, and if you have any particular expertise in real estate.
Oh, thank you.
Oh yeah. So why is real estate compelling, and do you have any personal connection to real estate?
So, I really wanted to approach this story in terms of community. So much of the original story to me is about a girl who's really trying to figure out her place away from home, who feels so strongly about where she comes from that she kind of misses the forest for the trees about what other people think about her and the place that she comes from. When I was thinking about what that means for us today, she has a real sense of stakes in what happens with the arrival of these new people into her neighborhood. And today, what does that look like? That looks like gentrification. It looks like people who come into your hometown who tell you, we know better than you do about how to make this a great place to live. Like, what are you talking about? This is already a great place to live. You come to it with these misconceptions and these assumptions that you make because you are already thinking about how you want to change it. And that's something that Elizabeth would absolutely push up against, And I think in terms of an issue that we all understand in one way or another, we understand where we come from, and we understand when people who are not from those communities comes in and tells us what they want to do to it, we feel a sense of defensiveness. And we also feel a strong sense of communal tie to the place that created us. Even if we disagree with it, or even if we didn't want to end up there, we have a relationship from being there. And gentrification and development is such an issue that is really relevant and resonant, not just in New York, but everywhere. How do you protect an idea of your neighborhood as being for the people that it's for, and not a tourist trap for people from, Ohio or Italy, like people who come to vacation there. And when I was thinking about how I wanted to articulate that argument, it's really coming from this idea of, here's what I know to be true about what I call home. Here's what you are assuming to be true about what you're going to do to it. And the journey in the plot is about, well, maybe we were both kind of wrong, or maybe we were coming at it from different places. I don't think there's a clear-cut answer in terms of development about what's good and what's bad. I think it's simplistic. But I think we lean towards that because we want there to be a simple answer. That's a very long answer, but that's, it touches every part of our lives and the people that we know. And I think that's a really interesting place to start. Everybody has an opinion already, I come to real estate honestly, which is to say I graduated college and needed to find a way to pay my bills. And so I ended up working in a real estate office for a time. And it's a great place for creative inspiration. There's a lot of personalities. It's a very fast-paced business. It's like you watch a little Bravo reality show about realtors and you're like, they can't possibly be like this in real life. Yes, they absolutely can. It's a little bit like local news anchors, I feel like. Weathermen. You're like, are they really this way? I haven't met any local news anchors or weathermen, so I'm not trying to disparage anybody, but I have met real estate agents. So there you go.
I love it. If anyone's a weatherman, we're so sorry.
We love weathermen.
Yes,
Meteorology
so
is
sorry.
fantastic.
I have a question, which I'll just butt in here. Since we're in a bookstore, it feels appropriate. And I'm always curious about this with writers. So what do you like to read in general? Like, what are your reading habits? What do you love to read? And then does that change at all when you're writing? Like when you're working, do you specifically try to read things differently?
That's a great question. I try to have like a mixed diet, I love an occasional pop history nonfiction book. I also love, like I'm getting mixed up in my brain here. I appreciate upmarket literary fiction a lot of the time. It's what I go for just to get a sense of voice and of the market. And I really like to dive into that. But for fun, I love a good romance novel. I'm a big fan of like a gothic horror kind of vibe. I like to read across because you never know, you find fun stories everywhere, So I recently got into reading a little horror for a bit, little pattern of horror novels, which is not usually what I go for, but yeah. And when I write, I find that I really can't read what I usually reach for reading. I don't like other people's voices to infect me too much, which is a horrible way of saying that, but everybody has their own kind of internal voice. And it's hard when you read other things to not pick up on their patterns. So I can read things that are not what I'm trying to write, like a sci-fi or a fantasy, but things that are a little too close to where I want to be, I find that I stay away from those.
I totally agree with that. You do sort of subconsciously pick up rhythm and that kind of thing. Anyone else? More questions?
Yeah. I've already asked a question. That in your retelling, you examine prospects in a slightly broader way. Could you talk about women's prospects in the book, i.e., perhaps a merger of romantic relationships and work opportunities?
Okay, in the book, let's talk about women's prospects writ large, be they romantic prospects or professional prospects, and perhaps a merging of the two.
Yeah, so I've spent a lot of time with Pride and Prejudice. I've read a lot of other people's interpretations about Pride and Prejudice, and I think it gets a lot of flack sometimes for being a bit shallow in its concerns. People tend to say that it's too focused on the marriage market and things like that. And what I wanted to do was say, Jane is really smart. I think Jane is an incredibly smart thinker. And when you zoom out a little bit from the way that looks in that book, what she's really trying to represent are economic concerns. For the Bennets, as soon as Mr. Bennet dies, her daughters are essentially homeless and they can't be employed. They have no money and they will be out on the street. And that concern is something that we can all relate to, as a parent, as a friend. If your loved one is out there and they don't have a job, they don't have a place to live, you're going to be freaking out. You want them to be able to be self-sufficient and to take care of themselves. And when I was translating that, I was like, this makes sense to focus on kind of to draw out that economic concern more directly. She is a little overbearing, Mrs. Bennet, and she is very overly concerned with what happens and a bit of a micromanager. All of those things are true, but it comes from this place of, well, I don't really want my daughters to die on the street, which I think we can all understand. And just pairing that with sort of my own understanding of what it was like to try to find a job after college and to textualize that with the second generation narrative, what do you do if your mom is so intent on seeing you in a very narrow definition of success? You need a high paying job. You need to be a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant. And you've been told about this narrative of defining your own success and self-sufficiency. And what you want to do is, be a journalist, or you want to be a photographer, things that are much less stable. You can understand where each side is coming from. You can understand why they feel as strongly as they do. But you can also understand why they get upset when someone else is going against what they think is the right thing. And especially with the marriage proposal from Mr. Collins in the original book, essentially what Elizabeth does there is turn down a paying job. So I was like, she's going to turn down a paying job. And as someone who is unemployed at that point that she does that, you're like, come on, do you have other offers? No, this is the best thing that's coming across your way right now. You can understand how frustrated Mrs. Chen is by her move. But for Elizabeth, it's a question of personal integrity. And neither side is wrong. They're just arguing about different things. And I wanted to highlight that because I think it turns the plot into something much more urgent.
I love that. That was a beautiful answer. I think we have one more question here.
I've got so many questions. We've all read romance novels where it's more romance, but there's not that love story that you believe in. How did you go about writing that love story? How did you think it through? How many drafts did you go through? What was that process?
A great question about romance. How did you think about the love story, about writing it, about digging into the love and romance of it all?
So this is one of the most famous Western romances, I think, of the last 500 years. So obviously there's no pressure there. One of the things that really stands out to me about how Elizabeth and Darcy progress is that they both change. I didn't want it to feel like one side was more right than the other. I don't think that's true. They're both coming from equally distorted perception places. And what happens is they meet each other and they are frustrated and confused and baffled by each other, and they provoke each other into growing and into their own sense of self-development. And it's through that process of knowing each other that they're able to emerge at the end with a better understanding of who they are, and with a change that they've both undergone to become more sensitive and less judgmental and more open to the world. And when I was thinking about that, I really let that concept lead me through writing their romance. They're both very annoying people. It must be said. They should annoy you at different points, but they're both, the kid who's going to like bolt and raise their hand up first thing in class to be like, I know the answer. All right, cool. Sit down. And when they're both in a room together, there's a little bit of tension between them that leads them both to kind of think, well, maybe I am wrong about some things, or maybe I'm not seeing things the way that they really are. And it's that reevaluation that allows them to be changed and to be real partners for each other by the end. You need that process to happen. So I didn't want to lose sight of that. I really wanted it to feel like they were kind of fighting their way through it the whole time, because they really are.
I could talk about this forever. This is so great. So interesting. Love me some Jane Austen. So anyone else? Anyone? And I'm sure you'll have lots of time to ask her lots of questions one-on-one too. You can, yeah, please. When you write a book, does it just flow? Do you have an ending in mind? What is that process like?
Writing a book feels a little bit like undergoing an act of self-warfare, I will say. I knew the shape of this particular book because I knew I wasn't going to change the ending. A lot of times when I write a book, I understand how it starts and how it ends. And the journey is trying to connect all the dots in the middle. And in terms of timeline, every book is a different beast. Every story that you try to tell, you learn new things about that story and about yourself. I don't time myself necessarily, but I think they all they all take different amounts of time because you're just sitting in these worlds and processing.
When did you write the first draft, and how much did it change over the course of the journey?
This book is really quite exceptional in the sense of being an exception. I wrote this book pretty much, I started drafting in the midst of COVID lockdown. So my brain in that span of time was not, shall we say, as it's ever been before or since. We were being sequestered in New York. You know, we had a curfew at that point, and I had all of this time and energy, and I couldn't go outside. And so I was really diving into my old comfort reads, Pride and Prejudice being one of them, and it really started to spin this whole world out of it. So it was an unusual drafting process that I don't think will be repeated unless we find ourselves in quarantine again, which I really hope we do
Don't
not.
even say it.
Yeah. But every book is different. You know, some books, they are a little bit more formed and they come out a bit easier. Some books really fight you the whole way.
That's the truth. It's hard work to make it look easy.
Does it ever look easy? Yeah.
To make it read easy, I guess. Well, this is such a joy. Does anyone else have any other questions, comments, or concerns?
I just want to say thank you so much to Kate for
Oh,
being
gosh.
here, for being such an excellent moderator. I really appreciated the conversation. Yeah.
So much fun. This is awesome. And I just love this book, and I just love getting to meet you. This is great. And thank you to East City.
Yes, thank you to East City. Yes, I believe there will be a table setup happening.
I can give you details.
Yeah.
So thank you all so much for joining us, everyone in person, on Zoom. And thank you so much to Kate and CK. We are so happy that you're here tonight. CK will be signing afterwards. We're going to take a moment to just reset the space. You can help us out by folding up your chair and putting it against the wall as you get up. And we will have the table out here. If you'd like to buy a book, you can do so upstairs or on our website. And if you want to get a head start on lining up, you can line up around the area of the couch. But thank you once again. We can do another round of applause and move on to signing.